That.org Hardcore 2.0 coming your way, episode 97. This is going to be a really fun one. Today, we're going to talk about when is it best to start using PEDs by Euro Pharma. So, Mobster and I, we're going to go over, we're going to tell you some facts and about age and development. We're going to tell you the facts behind it. There's been guys that have run steroids really young. We'll tell you what has happened to them and why it may be a better idea to wait, or why it won't be a better idea to wait. We're going to kind of give you the viewpoints on that. Like, you make your final decisions no matter what your age is, so you can make an informed decision and go ahead and know the facts behind it. We're also going to talk about the training and skill sets that is required. It's not all about age. It's not all about development in your body, being young. You could be in your 40s, but what about that? What about, if you're 40 and never used steroids before, never really worked out before, is it the right time to hop on steroids or not? We'll talk about that too. So we'll give you facts behind that. We're talking about good starter steroids from Euro Pharma and how to use. This is important because some steroids are for guys who are more new to it, and some steroids are for people who have experience. So we're going to kind of tell you those. We don't want to set you down the wrong path. And those of you who are more experienced, maybe you have a friend who's new, who you're trying to help out, you can kind of tell him about this and show him this podcast and get him. And then on the next one, we're going to talk about more experience stacks on our next podcast.
Yeah.
And then we're going to talk about, look, why Euro Pharma is great for newbies and in all people. So whether you're a newbie, whether you've experienced, we're talking about why it's so important. So let's start with age and development, Mobster. You had some thoughts on this early on.
Dave. Yeah. I'll start with the age issue. Okay. I mean, look, as Steve says quite properly, and as I said to Steve in the pre-show, right? And let me start it this way, Steve. Every so often, we'll have people come on the forums who are, in our minds, too young. And it's been pointed out, and I've even used this as a kind of sort of pro and con type argument, right? In many countries, I'll use the United States of America and the UK because that's where Steve and I come from as prima facie examples. You are at age 16 in this country, Steve, you can get married. I believe at age 18, you can vote. I think at 18, also, you can become a member of parliament. I believe at 18 again. I think even at 16, you can get married, but you need your parents' permission, and so on. So there's certain things where you go, how come you guys want me to wait this length of time to this particular age when I can vote, when I can fight, to put it crudely, Steve, when I can fuck, I can die for my country, I can represent my country, I can get married, I can do all these things, but you guys are saying I need to wait until I'm 25 years of age before I take steroids. And 25 is a kind of age that we grab at thin air. It just seems to be, in terms of the average Joe, women actually mature physically a little bit earlier than men, but the average Joe is kind of physically pretty much there by age 25. Now, actually, the statistics suggest, and I've covered this on other shows, that actually in terms of your maximum height, it's typically around age 21. By the age of 25, especially if you've got some sort of university, college, advanced education or whatever, you're doing quite well in your career. And you typically peak, on average, by age 35. By age 30, you're almost certainly married or in a long-term relationship, if that's your thing. You've probably had your first kid, if not your second, and so on and so forth. In terms of your maximal strength, and again, this is people that do not train, it's typically between age 30 to 35 years of age. If you train, you typically add on all the numbers I said, in terms of height, physical maturity, whatever, roughly 5 to 10 years. So, for example, I would argue that in my case, Steve, maximal strength, in terms of me being competitive, was around the age of 40 to 45. So that's 10 years past, 5 to 10 years past the average Joe in the street who does not train. So why do we talk about the age thing specifically? So what we're looking for really, and there are other issues which we'll touch upon, but what we're looking for in terms of the age is full physical maturity. That's pretty much maximal height, like I said already, maximal bone structure, you're well past puberty, mentally you're kind of ready. I mean, here's a big argument which we've used on occasion with the younger listeners and especially the younger members of the forums. They quite rightly use the argument that I addressed earlier on, and they'll come on and say, I think I'm ready. You go, are you really? And the reason why us older motherfuckers, same as your mum and dad, same as your parents, and same as your aunties and uncles, is all we know from our own practical experience, as our parents knew and our grandparents knew and our great grandparents knew, etc. The way that we thought and acted when we were teenagers, right up to the age 18, 19, the way that we thought and acted when we were 21, just 3 years past 18, the way that we thought and acted when we were 25, 27, 30, and 35 differs. And it differs for a huge amount of reasons. Some of that is just practical experience of life. People have died, I've got married, we've had kids, finished my advanced education, and so on and so forth. But mostly it comes down to, and a little bit of that experience is combined, we think differently. We aren't so fucking eager to go head first into crazy shit. And one of the things we've seen over the years, and as I said on another show, Steve, I've probably been online, I'm going to say probably the earliest would be about 1990. So the computers, the whole PC, the bulletin boards, message boards, forums, etc. Since about 1990, that whole thing, and getting into these kind of conversations online, typed out and whatever for a very long period of time. And one of the things that we've seen is younger members of those forums from then till now coming on, all very gung-ho about doing recreational drugs and getting drunk, never mind using steroids, and at some point regretting decisions that they made. So, for example, when we see this on the forums again, if you are younger, between the ages of 18 and 25, and we're there trying to persuade you to wait for a few years, as often as not, one of the things we'll get you to wait for, and the reason why we say this is your hepta. In other words, we want you to be fertile. We want you to have the ability to have children. What we don't want you doing is hopping on in a kind of loose, uneducated, ill-informed kind of way to steroids, and then making a mistake because you're very gung-ho then, and it might change within a couple of years. And we've seen this again and again and again from, I don't care, I'm not interested in having kids. Well, of course you're not interested in having kids. You're 18, 19 years of age. It's not on your radar yet. But you've now closed down your ability to produce sperm, to fertilize an egg. And then a few years down the road, you suddenly find, as most of us have done, at some point, especially in a more serious relationship, especially those of you that have been married, it's still a good 50, 60% of you, long-term relationships and or actually married in some sort of ceremony, the person that you want to have kids with, and especially one of the sort of foundation, there is no give in this particular argument, typical relationship, is that she loves you enough that she thinks you would be the person she'd like to father a child with. But you made that decision when you was 18 or 19 in terms of mental maturity, where you didn't give a damn. And now you find yourself fucked by a decision you made 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years before. So we know that because we've seen it a million times. I could literally, I think it's actually less than it used to be, Steve, but we will still get a couple of posts like this every single month on the forums. Doesn't matter what forum you go to, but especially on Evo, we will still see this come up, and we will still see someone worried about the sperm count or fertilizing, or my wife would like to have kids. And we've even had people that have had children further on in that relationship, into the second or third relationship, and actually they're actually physically mature, mentally mature, they're in their 30s, and it's still an issue because of decisions to cruise, never come off, go on TRT too early, and so on and so forth. And we even had one recently, me and addressed this on another show, where he was on a steroid cycle and at the same time wanted to restart his ability to produce sperm. He goes, mate, you're literally doing something right now that is inhibiting your body's ability to recover and then get into the situation of trying to increase your sperm count. So we pointed out, in that case, the bloody obvious. There's also, arguably, Steve, the physical maturity. And as I said, you've got the mental and the physical. Then the physical maturity is kind of annoying insofar as that we all know, every single one of us at some point, whether we were schools or college or university, guys, and for that matter, girls, who physically matured early. I think we've all had at least one buddy at school, Steve, who had a moustache when he was 13, and certainly way more hair on his upper lip than the rest of us. He might have come from an Iranian, an Asian, Iraqi background, whatever, but he had that hirsute thing going on, the little tiny goatee, and so on and so forth. There's always going to be one of the girls that has boobs and a woman's body way ahead of time. And the problem is, of course, that physical maturity can actually not necessarily tie in at the same time as mental maturity. So you can have someone who is fully physically an adult, but not mentally ready. So what you sometimes see, and I think, as I said to Steve in the pre-show, this applies to freaks of nature, the genetic freaks, the athletes, the jocks, that become the open class professionals who have a bunch of other things, including their ability to handle steroids and PEDs of other descriptions, way better than most people. And what you will quite often see with those individuals is this person was muscular at school, male or female, muscular at school. When the rest of us, our bollocks hadn't dropped, and we hadn't even got any pubes yet, no boobs, no pubes, no drop balls, no nothing like that. This jock was all the way there. They had a six-pack and genetic shape for shoulders and chest and quads and whatever else, and athletic ability at the same fucking age as us. And most of our group, most of our peers weren't anywhere. We're still kids. But this person was all the way up to adult. And there's actually a great argument to be made in that case that some of them, a few people, are physically mature. We will even ask, this is again trying to be helpful, post up a picture. If you think you have the genetic predisposition to potentially, arguably, be a good competitive professional, especially bodybuilder, weightlifter, strongman, whatever else, let's see a picture. If you actually do possess great genes, we will see it. What we might see is a young man or a young lady who's 5 years away from that, is too physically young, isn't physically mature. And so then we get into that whole, is that person physically ready but not mentally? Will the decision making change as it might, and so on and so forth? And here's the thing again, for obvious reasons, when we're doing these evolutionary type podcasts, we're trying to give out solid information, and we don't want to sound like your mum and dad, but sometimes we kind of have to. It's better coming from us or on the forums as moderators or people that just reply to your posts and having 50, 40, 20, whatever of us saying this, fella, we think from our own experience, from mistakes that we've made, and that helps as well, Steve, the experience of fucking up ourselves, that we think you should wait. You're not physically as mature as you think as you are. You do not appear to have the genetic predisposition to become a great pro, even if you are physically mature, and so on and so forth. And again, it's that whole mental, listen, listen, there's not one of us that hasn't fucked up at something in life. Got a girl pregnant too early, signed up for something like a career in the military, perhaps we really, really shouldn't have done, thinking it was some sort of romantic thing, voted for something stupid, made silly decisions when it comes to finances and whatever else. And what we're really getting here, and this is where it comes to the forums again, Steve, and of course these podcasts, these shows, is maybe we made mistakes for PEDs. Maybe some of us did hop on too early. So what do you think about the younger aspect? We'll get to the older aspect in a minute. What do you think about the younger aspect in terms of physical and or mental maturity?
So look, your body and mind doesn't fully develop until you're in your mid to late 20s. And you tell guys this and they laugh, they think that you're making fun of them or you're trying to be funny, but it's not. And it's not a bad thing. And I'll explain why, because that's why you go, you go to school, you go to college, you learn skills at that age. When you go to any college, there's not many older people there. Okay. Now it has to do with us, obviously, societal things or whatever. And you get older, you get married, you have kids, or you go through divorces or something, so you just don't have time to go back to college. Yeah, I get that part. But the main reason for that isn't that. The main reason is when you're in your teens and early 20s, you're able to learn things. You're able to pick up skills better. Okay. So your body and your mind is still developing. And that's something you need to take advantage of, especially in the modern economic society where having these skills are very valuable and not having these skills are very invaluable. So even if you're someone, you're like, Steve, I don't want to go to college, blah, 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 school's not my thing. Okay, go learn a skill. Go learn how to fix air conditioners. Go learn how to do electrical stuff. go learn plumbing, go learn how to fix roofs. These are skills that you're able to build a business with and make money off of. And it's very important to know that. But how do you learn that stuff? It's very hard in your 40s to learn this stuff. It's very hard in your 40s to learn, trigonometry or advanced calculus or this stuff, because your mind isn't developing the way it is when you're younger. So your reproductive system is going through a developmental phase. Now, let's say we throw anabolic steroids at your reproductive system and we cause your pituitary glands to shut down when you're 20 years old. What's going to happen is you're going to cause permanent and short-term and permanent damage to your sperm motility. And that's your sperm ability to move around and be strong and get into an egg and stuff. So it's going to affect your fertility as you get older. It's going to affect your total testosterone levels as you get older, because your pituitary glands and your Leydig cells aren't going to be functioning as best as they could because you're interfering with them, you see. So it's very important that we know this, and the whole mental aspect that can be under debate because we don't have rock hard evidence on that, but we do have rock hard evidence and anecdotal evidence showing that if you use steroids at 18, 19, 20, even 21, 22, that by the time you're 28, 29, you're going to have lower testosterone levels than your peer. Okay, all things being equal. And that's because you fucked with your reproductive system. You shut your HPTA down, and that's going to have that effect. So do you want that? Do you want to have to go on TRT before you're even 30 years old? Because a lot of people are having to do that. My old co-host on this podcast, Coach Trevor, he used steroids. He wanted to compete. He wanted to become a pro bodybuilder. He had dreams. He used steroids at 18 years old, harsh steroids, and he abused them quite a bit because he wanted to get his pro card really, really bad. He ended up getting his pro card, but what he also ended up doing is having to go on TRT in his early 20s because he had shut down his reproductive system. He had to go on thyroid medication because he ruined his thyroid in the process as well. And that's not something you want to do. And for him, now he's not going to be able to have kids. So that flexibility is gone, because even though you may not want to have kids in your 20s, maybe in your 30s or 40s, you want to have kids. Who the hell knows? You're going to get married one day or fall in love with a girl, and she's going to want to have kids. You're not going to be able to do it. And then you're going to look back and regret it. Like, man, why didn't I just wait a few more years? So, we have the evidence in place to know that there's a near 100% chance that if you use steroids and you're less than 25 years old, that you can expect long-term permanent damage to your HPTA. So you're going to notice as you get older, your testosterone levels are going to be lower than where they should be, all things being equal. So that's why it's a good idea, in my opinion, to wait till you're at least 25 years old to start using anabolic steroids. And even later, I'm not a hypocrite saying this. I used my first steroids when I was about 28 or 29. And even I think I could have benefited if I'd waited longer. And Mobster didn't use his first steroids till you were how old, Mobster? Go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Mobster. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
sorry, Steve. That's a technical problem. Yeah, age 37, mate. And I actually went out of my way, one of my more sensible decisions we didn't have a lot of access at that particular time to good advice. And I think one of my more sensible decisions was, and I was in a kind of responsible job with the government at that particular point, civil service, out on the street dealing with people and whatever. I went and brought books. I went and literally brought books on the subject. I think I was probably holding myself back a little in terms of you're not going to be a professional bodybuilder. I didn't know that I was going to end up doing the stuff that I did within Grip. That came a few years later, and so on and so forth. So for me, it was a kind of big decision to start to maximize my gains. And I think I'll also get into the physical maturity stuff. So I literally had, again, more sensible approach to, right, let's see how much I can add muscle, get stronger, whatever. And again, this applies to listeners for different things and different aspects. I wanted to maximize, and again, more sensible approach, what I could naturally, and then took my time, brought a couple of books from the two biggest gurus at that time in the UK, And I was even able to end up, fortunately, for one reason or another, with an association with both those individuals to the point of being assisted by one and literally going drinking and talking personally with the other one. Neither would live anywhere near me in London, and had a sort of relationship with them, almost professional in terms of what I became and what I'm doing in terms of these shows. So I was very, very lucky in that particular regards, and that enabled me to, again, also sensibly, I looked at what was being talked about by them and by other individuals. And it was very much a case of, for me, and this is one of those little light bulb moments I had, where I realized that everything that everybody disagreed on was probably their opinion, their experience. But all the things that they agreed on was probably going to apply to everybody else. So, for example, in their case, both of them had you start with a very simple Dynabol cycle. And of course, at that point, with Bill Phillips and others talking about stuff in magazines and roundtable discussions and even cassette things and very early YouTube and podcasts of the type that you could listen to, everybody who had doing a super simple debol cycle. What they weren't really discussing was the physical mental maturity. And obviously they dealt with all kinds of ages. But again, especially, for example, Mick Hart's case, Steve, I think at some point over the years, he'd hit 10 or 11,000 conversations with people that wanted to ask questions about steroids. And just by having that kind of background of statistical data enabled him, in one of, again, his more sensible moments, to realize that if you went on PEDs too early, you kind of almost negated your ability to max out, your ability to add loads and loads of muscle. You almost needed to, and we'll get into this in a minute, to have learned your trade a little bit. And then you've got the information, and I've actually seen a guru of some sort offering to sell this information, where if you've worked with that number of clients, that number of consultations, you get to realize who makes the best gains. And the best gains were, again, made by people that were the right age, physically mature, had learned they'd done their apprenticeship, so to speak. So I'll touch onto that a little bit. And it comes with the aspects of the older individual, someone who's coming into this game who's physically mature, 35 plus. Now, we will occasionally see, just this morning on the forums, we had someone, I think is very close to 40, 50 years of age. I think 50, either 48, 50 or 52. I can't remember. But if that motherfucker's not physically mature, no one is. And if he's not mentally mature at 48, 50 or 52, and we occasionally see in life someone who isn't, still young at heart, crazy motherfuckers, etc. For the most part, most people have got lots of life experience, certainly physically mature. They'd have to literally have a medical condition to say that they're not. And he was maybe a little bit too keen to get on steroids straight away. So analogy that I use with Steve in the pre-show, it kind of applies to young drivers, and in fact, older drivers. Surveys in America and in the United Kingdom, where they say to drivers of all ages, of all sexes, of all kind of description, racial backgrounds, whatever else, are you a good driver or not? 70% of people, when asked, will say that they're a good driver, Steve. And of course, the reality of that situation is that is stupidly high. You can't all be good drivers. 70% of general population cannot all be good drivers. It's a self-analytical type thing. So the analogy here applies in terms of driving. 18-year-old drivers, 16, 17-year-old drivers, but mostly 18-year-olds, where you've got super high car insurance. You can barely afford the payments on the car if you're paying for them at all, if mum and dad isn't. Way, way, way too many young people think they can drive like racing drivers. They certainly think they have the skills to do crazy shit in cars. And as we know, and this is the reason why those premiums are so high, they do not. Pretty much everybody. I'm thinking of one of my younger brothers crashed a car. Wasn't bad, but loads of people have crashed a car. They fucked their stuff up. And it's because they think they are better than they are. So here's how this stuff works in terms of you're old enough, your mental age is sufficient, your physical age is sufficient. Why don't we want you to drop on steroids straight away? Now listen, when it comes to advice over practicalities, you guys, especially those of you that are that age, do what the fuck you like. You are full-grown men or women. You are physically mature, you're mentally mature, you've got life experience. If you decide you want to go out and start using PEDs straight away, we can't stop you. But here's what we advise. And it might sound a little bit preachy, Steve, but it's got to be said. And it's the purpose of the podcast, of course. We want you to learn how to get the best out of your training. Why would we want you to jump on PEDs and then not get the best from a cycle? If, for example, Steve, and I'm just going to use Dynamo as an example again, if you decided, I'm old enough, I'm mature enough, everything's good to go, I'm going to start using drugs straight away, and you hopped on, I don't know, Dynamo, but all you're doing is press-ups, literally just press-ups, 2 or 3 sets of 30. You're quite good. That's really good, actually, but you're doing nothing else. You've changed nothing in your diet. You've had no lifestyle options. You haven't meal prepped. You haven't done any of the things that we would kind of want you to get the best out of a stack with. I would probably in that situation go, you can do what the fuck you like, but you're really wasting your time. What we want you to do, and this is the reason why we encourage logs on a forum, etc., is we want you to learn your trade. We want you to go to the gym, maybe the first couple of times, work with a PT, learn how to do the basic exercise as well, get help and advice on anything that's a little bit more complicated, and kind of start to train, just literally get in there, go to the gym, start to become a regular trainee. Then at some point, you realize that nutrition is just as important as the training. So now you start to clean up your diet, you throw the crap out, you start eating clean, you've seen these photographs, you go on YouTube, you've learned what meal prep's a thing, and those that meal prep always do really, really well. And then you start to identify what might be lacking in your physique. You might come to me or Steve with a consult and you say, listen, I think I'd like a more aesthetic physique. I'd like something that's like a small version of the classic physique. Okay, then stop doing exercises that thicken your waist. Start doing more exercise or have a greater focus in the gym on broadening your shoulders and so on and so forth. So now you actually get into it. In my case, it might be strength, but in your case, it might be a more aesthetic beach type look. So we want you to learn what creates that look. Now, at some point in that process, call it your apprenticeship, you are training properly, you are eating properly, you are dedicated to the process. You're hitting the gym 3 times a week. You're certainly physically and emotionally mature. We've already covered that. Now would probably be the time. And the reason we say that is you might get some gains doing things half-assed. You might get some gains only hitting the gym twice a week, but you get better gains if you hit it 3 times, 4 times. You might get some gains if your food's a bit off point, but you're going to get much better gains if your food's on point. And you're certainly going to get better gains if the training is actually focused in a specific direction, target or aspiration that you have for yourself. Now you have, quote unquote, served your apprenticeship. You know what intensity means. You know how to plan with help. Come on the forums with a PT, whatever, or on your own. You know how to plan a workout. You know how to bring your game to the gym. You don't go into the gym and half-ass it. You are in there with a target, with a focus, and so on and so forth. That would be the time to bring PEDs to the table. Like I said, there might be an argument to be made. Even if you half-ass it, you'll gain a little bit of muscle. We know that there are studies out there where they did no training and they used a low-dose anabolic and they still put on a couple of pounds of muscle tissue. But how much better would it be if you knew what you were doing, you had the full physical and mental maturity, you know what you're doing when it comes to the knife and fork, sitting at the table, you know what it's about, you can get advice, and your gains, when you use even a sensible stack, Steve, will be that much more advanced, that much better. What do you think about this idea of learning what you need to know before you start using PEDs? And then obviously taking that time, Steve, to learn what PEDs do before you're ready.
So we're not robots. We're not computers. You take a computer box, all right, let's say a desktop computer. And I'm not a computer person, so forgive me those of you out here who are. I'm just giving you an example. But take the computer, right? I have this big computer right now under my feet. Now, if I open up that computer and I add in a bunch of RAM, and I add in a bunch of gigabytes, and I add in a faster modem or whatever, and a better sound system to it and all this stuff, and then I close it back up, and boom, now I have a computer that works even better. But our bodies aren't like that. So in our bodies, we've got to build up our own conditioning, our own muscle memory. So a lot of people have this misconception that, yeah, I can just use steroids and that will make me catch me up with other people. Like this freak in my gym who's got these big muscles, he's got these amazing genetics. So if I just, take a bunch of steroids, that will give me an even playing field with him. That's not how
If
this
only.
works. So
If
here,
only, Steve. Yeah.
listen, so it doesn't matter if you're 25 years old or 45 years old or 65 years old. It doesn't matter. If you don't have that muscle conditioning and that muscle memory, all right, under your belt, you're going to have to start fresh. Now, obviously, you and your buddy, I trained with a guy, I was 15, 16 years old. We used to go to the gym together, right? The entire summer, we went to the gym together, 3 months from our summer break. I made some really good improvements. Did I improve as much of as the captain of the football team improved? No, but I made some good improvements during those 3 months. But he couldn't improve very much. Like it didn't even look like he even worked out. His strength did not improve. He just had poor genetics, but he still was able to build the muscle conditioning. So when he went to play other sports like soccer or tennis or something like that, he was able to be stronger in those sports and excel. But he never became a great weightlifter. So yes, genetics are an element, but you have to build that muscle memory and body memory in the process. This is why you see professional athletes who blow out their knee and they're out for the year. Tom Brady, he blew out his knee. There was one year where a guy rolled into him as he was throwing the ball and he blew out his knee. He was out for the entire season. But then the next year he came back and he had his best season. Adrian Peterson, same thing. I think he had an ACL injury to his knee, blew out his knee. And he's a running back. He came back the next year and had 2,000 yards rushing, you know? So he had like a record-breaking season for a running back. Why is that? Because they've been training for football since they were like 4 years old. So for
Yeah.
them, even if they have to take a year off due to an injury, they'll come back stronger, as strong as before, even stronger, because literally the time off actually worked to their advantage to give their entire body a break, and they were able to come back and have record-breaking seasons. Now, of course, many other players, they'll have injuries and never come back. They don't have the drive to do it. They don't have the motivation to go through the rehab. So they just never come back. But I'm just giving the example. So muscle memory, body memory is very, very important. And it's the same thing when I had a buddy of mine I used to train when I was doing triathlons. I'll let you in Mobster in a second here, but I used to train with him. He actually broke his leg. Okay. And I was not faster than him. This guy had been training for triathlon since he was like 8 years old. Okay. So, and he was well ahead of me. Right. So when he broke his leg, we actually, after like 3 months, he started coming back when he got his cast off and stuff. And he started walking at first and speed walking, and then jogging. And eventually he started training with me. And we were equal for about like 2 or 3 weeks. We were equal when we go running. Right. And then after that, he not only went back to how he was before, as fast as he was before, where he'd blow me away, but he actually became faster than before. So you see that body memory and muscle memory works. This is why you should wait to put on, you need to build that muscle conditioning and that muscle memory before you start using steroids, because you want to have that in place that's kind of an investment where you can use that in the future and tap into it, so that when you do use anabolic steroids, you can tap into that even more and you'll have even
Yes.
better results.
Yes. I want to expand on that part, Steve. And I think one of the conversations we've had over the years when this kind of topics come up, and it goes thus, and this specifically applies to the average person hitting the gym, the average person with normal Joe type genetics. Way more applies to someone with that in the normal situation than it does extreme end, which is both the super freaks, open class, Mr. Olympia type bodybuilders, or those with really, really bad genetics. The average person, and we've seen this again, it comes from just looking around, seeing what happens with people that think about using PEDs and so on and so on. Is thus, the longer you wait, the more of a foundation you build. Stevesmi and I have called this kind of old man muscle. I call it almost like a baseline thing. I come off cycle, I know, and until probably, Steve, I get super old and stop training or whatever else, stop eating, There will be a base of strength and a base of muscle that will never go away. That same thing that Steve said about muscle memory, I've talked about on other shows. 2016, dropping back, ironically, Steve, hardly to fuck all, but I think I went from 290 to 280 pounds, and probably more than that, but that's what the scale said in terms of lack of muscle tone or whatever else because of the back injury at the 16 weeks, and then came back to the 290 8 weeks after returning to training. So obviously I'd rebuilt some of the muscle, but the scale didn't change, and then the scale caught up with, and I was back from 280 on the scales to 290 pounds in about 8 weeks, with about 80% of my strength came back. In other words, it was super easy for me relative to everything else, and certainly relative to the injury, to get back to very, very close to what I'd been before in a very short period of time, because I'd previously been training to that from that point from 1980 to 2016. So 36 years. I was never going to shrink down to 200 pounds. I was never going to lose all my strength and just go back to being a normal Joe because I'd spent so long. So in the average person, male or female, hitting the gym, you build a foundation of strength, a foundation of muscle that will pretty much carry you until you're in your dotage. And then you add in anabolics. And what we've seen in that particular example, Steve, is that the ones that have left it the longest and built up this solid foundation of strength, muscle, shape, whatever it is that you're listening to this podcast for, because we all have different aspirations. The longer you left it, the better the foundation was, and the more you was able to build on that foundation. Equally, we've seen people, for want of a better phrase, that have hopped on too soon, and it's almost like they've left something on the table. Yes, they used anabolics, and yes, they gained muscle, certainly over and above what they started from. But, and again, without sounding too preachy, and for you younger listeners, it's probably going to sound more preachy. The older listeners are probably nodding their head going, yes, motherfucker. Those leaving something on the table when it comes to aspiring to be a greater athlete of any description, faster, leaner, stronger, more muscular, whatever else, is kind of like, excuse me, what the fuck am I leaving shit on the table for? If I threw the javelin and I could throw it another 2 meters, why would I want not to throw it those other 2 meters? I'd want to build up a better foundation, then hop on the PEDs and throw it out to world record, to whatever your left the degree of aspiration is. Literally, as I said earlier on, the physical learning of your skill, weights, training in the gym, knowing how to use a machine, pushing your ass, making sure you get shit done, eating properly, 100%, lean, cuisine, meal prepped, whatever, and then knowing that you've pretty much maximized your gains. You've maximized what you're going to get naturally. You haven't left 5 or 10 pounds of meat, muscle on the table, then gone on steroids and gained 5 pounds and still be 5 pounds bigger than you was before. But really, you could have had another 10 pounds of natural muscle and then gained 5 pounds. And when you start to put it in those kind of numbers, Steve, you start to think, fucking me, 15 pounds, 10 pounds, an inch here, 50 pounds on my bench, 40 pounds on my squat. What the fuck? Why would I want to leave something on the table? Look at what Steve said about those top end athletes who are not what we would call weightlifters, or they will use weights as part of their prep, part of their process. They have started a foundation. I'm thinking of David Beckham in kiddies football, Steve. I think it was like 4, 5, 6, 7 years of age. And it was all those years of playing in the mud and the snow and the rain and whatever else over in the UK as a preteen, and then becoming a teenager, and then becoming a fully physically mature. That meant he had 20 years or more, whatever it was, to get to his absolute top of his game. Even, again, those genetic freaks that we talk about in these shows, the Derek Lunsfords et al., would have probably started. When we look at these things, most of those athletes started hitting the weights when they're age 15. And by the time they get to be physically mature, by the time they get to be open class pros or even classic pros or whatever, they pretty much all got 10, 15 years under their belt. They've kind of done that. And it might have been on PDs too early, but they've still put 15 years in to maximize their strength, to maximize their size and shape. I would actually argue that women And again, as I said earlier on, uh, just physically speaking, biologically speaking, when girls mature into being able to have kids earlier than boys. The mental maturities are roughly the same. They're a little bit ahead of us. That's why you'll see more girls at uni and college now than you did before, and a little bit ahead of men. But we typically all catch up, and it comes more or less equal by the mid-20s, Steve. So it's kind of the same there. So in the terms of them being able to have children and thinking more like adults, they're a little bit ahead of most teenage boys, and we know that. We know we've known it forever. It's just that we've seen it statistical data backs it up. So in terms of that whole stuff, whether it's a normal average person out in the street hitting it, or it's a genetic freak or whatever else, you almost need to have served a certain amount of time in the gym, learning your game, whether you're, as I said, freaks of nature or not. 10, 15 years seems to be the norm. I think, and over the years that I've been following bodybuilding, and to a lesser degree, weightlifting and strongman, purely simply because bodybuilding is better covered, we've only seen a handful of guys that have only been hitting the gym 2 or 3 years and look like freaks. And 9 times out of 10, they go on the gear straight away, they blow up, they do incredibly well for a couple of years, and then they disappear. The ones that are able to stick it out are ones that have put the 10 or 15 years in. And again, listen, right? You, the listener, would be the one that decides how important it is to you to get the best out of what you're doing. And again, if we said quite properly earlier on that you might change your mind, some of you listeners won't be listening to shows like this and will not be hitting the gym because other stuff in life comes along and changes their mind. The average person that goes to the gym only pretty much hits it for about 3 years, Steve. So we've only got a few years to grab you, get you to do this game for life, and really, as we say with these kind of podcasts, to get you to do your absolute best to hit your maximums and go from there, Steve. Now, as we were talking about again in the pre-show, what kind of advice, and I'll start with you, Steve, would you give to someone who is ready in terms of a beginner's type stack?
Well, the most popular stack we see offered to newbies is the, cookie cutter 500 milligram a week testosterone option. And Euro Pharmacies has excellent testosterone. So what I would recommend if you want to go down this route is the testosterone cypionate or the testosterone enanthate. And they're both smooth injections. You only have to inject it a couple times a week. Some people, even with the cypionate, will go once a week. And you can run 500 milligrams for 10 to 12 weeks. You'll get good results. Now, keep in mind, this isn't a quote unquote safe stack. This is the misconception. People think, oh, testosterone is safe. You're still going to get shut down on it. So it's important to run a PCT. You're still going to have estrogenic side effects. So it's important to run an AI, depending on how much you're using. And then also you're going to deal with androgenic side effects. So you want to use your support supplement. So in no way is this like a conservative cycle or a mild cycle or anything, but it's a really good one to start if you're truly, truly ready. It's something you could definitely start with. And then, another option too is you can run a little bit of an oral to kickstart or finish the cycle off. I don't have a problem with that. A lot of people have a problem with that. Like, oh, stick to one steroid. I don't agree with that. If you really put in the time and you're truly ready and you have the knowledge on the stuff, you listen to this podcast, I don't see an issue with running some testosterone and then running an oral with it. Why the hell not? In Euro Pharmacies, they have tons of oral options. I'll just go through the list. There's 3. Dianabol, if you want to bulk
Yep.
up.
Yep.
Dummy-proof steroid. Cheap steroid. I know you like that one, Mobster. Anavar and Turinabol. Also, good steroids. Again, dummy-proof steroids are easy to use. They don't come with the estrogenic side effects. So if you do choose to run Dianabol with testosterone, you definitely want to get the Euro Pharma Aromacin or Arimidex. And those
Yep.
will really be good. So in terms of dosing, Dianabol anywhere from 10 milligrams up to 50 milligrams, which would be a high dose. I like 20 to 30 personally, back when I used to run it. Anavar and Turinabol, anywhere from 25 to 50 milligrams a day for 8 weeks or less would work just
Yep.
fine. And then other injectables too that you can do for a cycle. If you want to either keep your testosterone dose low, or if you want to exclude testosterone, I don't have an issue with that. I don't see what the big deal is. Some people do. A lot of people do, but I don't have a problem with it. But if you can run primobolan for 300 to 600 milligrams a week, or the equipoise, and Euro Pharmacies has excellent primo, and they have excellent equipoise. You can run either 300 to 600 milligrams, and as an option, you could stack in some testosterone at a low dose with it. And you can run that for 12 weeks, and you'll have a great cycle, and it'll be a mild cycle. You're not going to put on a ton of weight, but you'll have a good mild cycle, and you'll have less side effects than you would just going with testosterone at a high dose. So those would be my options, Mobster. Tell us about your options.
Yeah, I mean, I'll address one just as an example, Stephen. And the cookie cutter thing kind of in this situation actually applies. Typically, especially if you've had a couple of cycles under your belt, we might want to know more about your specific requirements. We certainly will ask questions like, have you run a cycle before? If you've never run a cycle before, even though it's a bit cookie cutter, Steve, the 500 milligrams of test for example, will probably give you great results. So your ability to respond first cycle, and I don't care what your age you is going to be quite good. But again, we're talking about the physically and mentally mature. You're going to get great results, and you do not need to dive in at pro level type stuff. We occasionally see, and even I think it was an older individual the other day said that they hadn't used steroids for 10 years, and I want an aggressive stack. That was literally, I think, the wording that they used, and I responded something like, if you haven't used any PEDs for 10 years, you're going to get a great response no matter what you do. You do not need to come back after 10 years and be aggressive in terms of your steroid use. The same thing applies to someone that's new to using PEDs. I would argue, Steve, that some of our best gains, and again, we say this from experience, and it sounds a bit cookie cutter in reply, that for the most part, the best gains are from your first cycle. Your body is kind of primed for the reasons that we spoke about earlier to do incredibly well, and your response to testosterone in all forms is probably the best that you're ever going to get at any time, especially if the cycle's perfect. And your ability to respond to, for example, in the case of, say, 500 milligrams of testosterone cypionate, roughly 4 times what your body's producing, I think, off the top of my head, Steve. And if you can't fucking gain on that, especially first time out, then you get into the whole 1,000 milligrams, and most people don't need to go over 1,000 milligrams. There's probably a certain element of truth to that as well. And again, this is just the general person, not advanced one way, not incredibly limited the other way, and so on. So, for example, and I've used myself as an example here again, 30 milligrams of Debo for 6 to 8 weeks, which was probably my first cycle ever, way back in the day. I wish I had access to that information to be able to tell the listeners. And I think I put on 10 pounds on cycle and kept somewhere between 5 and 6 pounds. That happened 2 or 3 times. And again, I was age 37. At that point, I'd been training for 22 years from age 15. So my response to D-Bowl, very low dose, 210 milligrams total per week, Euro Pharma type product, was incredibly good. Probably paid more than I do now, Steve. So here's something that's interesting, and we're going to talk about this with Euro Pharmas, whether it's cypionate or enanthate, whether it's using Masteron, Provarin, all of these options that are available. And I said this on another couple of shows, Steve, your access to information and advice, like this show, via Euro Pharmacies, via the forearms, is never, ever been as good as it is right now. Never. You've never had this access to information. I had to go out and buy 2 books. People had to ring up these 2 gurus. You literally had to book a meeting and go and sit down with them. Now, you can still do that. There are still prep coaches you can do that with. And again, if you're trying to compete, you want someone to sit down and give you a one-to-one on your specific requirements. But for the average person, your access to PEDs has never been as good. The broad spectrum of PEDs has never been as good. The information provided has never been as good. Podcasts like this, we're going to record a show probably this week, Steve, and one of our shows is at 100. We did an anniversary show some months ago where we'd hit 600 shows. We are probably looking across the full spectrum of the shows that we put out, Stevesmi and I, and those shows that he did with Coach Trevor before, etc., in the thousands, certainly the low thousands. Information you've never had before on Euro Pharmacies, and I'll use this as an example. On their oral products, never mind their injectables, Steve, if you go to the product description and specifically click on, for example, their product of Dynabol, it will literally have dosing information, ranges from this amount to this amount. And I believe typically, Steve, if you looked at it right now, is between 30 to 50 milligrams a day. I know top pros and competing amateurs that will sometimes push down about 100 milligrams a day for very short periods of time. But obviously, they're looking for specific requirement. But you've literally got product information giving you dosing information, time on cycle. Again, as Steve said, anywhere between 4 to 8 weeks. 6 to 8 weeks is the norm. Shorter, it seems to be recommended, and especially if you're doing multiple stacks through the year. For example, again, Steve, information that changes and the way that people use PEDs has changed. So there's a lot more younger people cruising, which we actually think is probably not going to benefit you in terms of your ability to procreate. But there are a lot more people staying on. We've talked about on other shows TRT. There are TRT products available from Euro pharmacies. CPNA, again, never mind a specific TRT product. CPNA, again, would be available. We've talked about pricing, for example, when we say Euro pharmacies and we say, if you go to a clinic, it's going to cost you this much. If you do self-TRT, it's so much cheaper. The information, there are specific forums that only discuss TRT. There was back in the day, some of the best information back in the day came from, unfortunately, from HIV forums, where the individuals, because they were suffering from medical issues and cancer, literally was talking about steroids to maintain a certain level of functionality in life and quality of life before they passed away or before full-blown HIV fucking ruined them in terms of their physical abilities. So some of the information, growth hormone and steroid use, retention of muscle came from that. We obviously looked also at other studies and so on and so forth. You have literally access off the forums to medical data and studies via universities and colleges. There are libraries, government-based libraries online where you can look at steroid studies, you can look at peptide studies, you can look at SARM studies, and you can literally, I think one of the legal requirements of pharmaceutical companies that have researched into SARMs, etc., is they have to post the data after a certain period of time online. You have access to that. Go back to when we started, Steve. We had nothing. This information was there, but you had to go to the library at the university and sat down and read it, and you needed to know where to find the information. Now you just Google it, and there it is. There's a SARM article. There's a response that they had from the study. We know how to read studies. I've never been to uni, Steve, but the understanding and the way that studies are put together is easier now than it's ever been before. We start SARMs users, PED users. We kind of become educated, Steve, to the point where we say, is that study skewed? Why is it skewed? Is the data not useful to us? Is it useful to us? Is there something on my side? All of these things. And that information, even to the average Joe, the beginner, the person who hasn't quite hopped on PEDs, has now become available. The only issue, arguably, and hopefully we're simplifying that somewhat with this show, is that sometimes it's fucking overwhelming, Steve. Talk about that access to product information, dosing, etc., that's now available through companies like Euro Pharma, and of course the data that everybody else can access as well.
Well, one of the things that we have now is blood work. We have the ability to take stuff and send it out to be tested. So now it's much more harder, all right, and really impossible to play these types of games. And that's why Euro Pharmacies, we know Euro Pharmacies is great because they've had their products sent out and tested anonymously. We've tested their blood work. You know, we know Euro Pharmacies. This is why Euro Pharmacies is trusted. This is why they're popular. They have products, whether you're new or advanced. This is why professionals use Euro Pharmacies. And this is why on the other end of the spectrum, the guy who's 25, 26 years old, and it's his first time using steroids, and he's really, really ready and excited. This is why he also uses Euro Pharmacy. So no matter where you are on the spectrum, it's perfect for you. And, you know, Mobster and I, we trust Euro Pharmacies. We recommend Euro Pharmacies to our most highest clients. We recommend them on the forums. And they're an excellent source. Look, at the end of the day, back when I first started using these anabolics, you know, you didn't know what you were using. There was no way to test
Steve.
them.
I'm going to say, let me just tell the listeners, and you can jump in, how bad the information was, how you had to take away the bias. You'd go onto some forums and you'd be talking to a 15-year-old quote-unquote expert. Someone else just wanted to sell you steroids. And then you would have things like, Steve, labs that were great and then they weren't great, and so on and so forth. So the information that was available when we first got started, the information that was available 5 years ago, access to solid labs 10 years ago was horrendous. And one of the things, the advantages of staying off as long as you possibly can and educate yourself while you're getting ready is the ability to learn good sources like Euro Pharmacies, good products, again, like Euro Pharmacies, the sponsor of this show, to know dosing from the information that we've given you via the logs, the forums, and also obviously the products themselves, which, as I said, great sites like Euro Pharmacies include that kind of information, and so on and so forth. And then, as Steve said quite properly, and I think this is just a Euro Pharmacy specific thing to finish, we talk about that from our experience. We talk about that from the knowledge that we've managed to build up over the years. And that's the reason why we're doing this show. So we know that we trust Euro Pharmacies. We have specifically used their products. We know that they've been tested. We know that they've been sent off to labs. We know literally of individuals on the forums who at their own expense. And even that, Steve, I was just going to think, so on a cost per based spending money on PDs versus for your income, it's probably cheaper now, based on the average income 10 years ago and the average income now. It's probably cheaper now than it's ever been to buy PEDs. There are way more companies like Euro Pharmacies that didn't back in the day, but do now offer you lab tests. Euro Pharmacies has been in the business for 27 years. In the years that I've been talking about Euro Pharmacies and doing these shows, what I think is 7 or 8 years, they've been putting up product tests since I was first becoming involved. And they were probably doing it before then. You didn't see that back in the day. I remember the 2000s, Steve, so 20-something years ago, 24 years ago, where groups of individuals started to get together and doing lab tests. Now, people could, even the cost of the lab test was exorbitant. And now the cost of the lab test has come down because machinery can do it for the lab techs. Whereas in the old days, the lab tech had to do it himself. So the cost per test has come down. Still not cheap, but $100, $150 has gone a lot further than back in the day where that might cover. I'll give you an example, Steve. I think the one that we've used on these shows spent the best part of $1,000. So it was roughly $100 a test. And back in the day, it would have probably been $200 a test. And yet the amount of income coming in to that individual back in the day would be less versus more now. So it's actually on a cost by test basis cheaper. The ability for you to find good sources like Euro Pharmacies, trusted sources like Euro Pharmacies, the ability to know how long they've been in business, to ask them questions. Customer service is as good as it's ever been, even in UGLs like Euro Pharmacies. We talk about it not being like Amazon and eBay, and yet in terms of putting products out, sponsors that we talk about, can, especially if it's a local product, get product to your door in 4 days. I think the average can be 5 days, 10 days. International can still be a little bit quicker, but it's still quicker than it used to be. It used to be fucking weeks and weeks. Now it's just held up by customs getting to your door. And even then, sometimes, Steve, it can be 2 weeks. So your ability for information, the knowledge that comes from these shows, the reputation of companies that have lasted through the years and brought up their own quality, brought up their own customer service, give literally, Steve, putting information that customers have asked for onto their product description has never been as good as it is today. And companies like Euro Pharmacies are a prima facie example of exactly the sort of approach that we want to see right across the board, and better now than it's ever been. They've got your vested interest. One more thing I'll say on this, and this applies again to the waiting until you're good and ready. So one of the things that I sometimes say is that a good company like Euro Pharmacies wants you to wait till you're ready, especially that you've got the disposable income, obviously, as a business, and then serve you for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years of the length of time that you're going to be hitting the gym. It might be great to do a really, really good deal off the bat, couple of $1,000, and you go out and you do a crazy stack. But for whatever reason, it's a little bit toxic. You feel like shit on it. And for whatever reason, maybe you don't stay in the gym, you go off and do something else. I would rather, if I was a company like Euro Pharmacies, have you for 10 years. So serving you right, getting you the right product, giving you the right dosages, offering great service is why we recommend companies like that. Please note, we are not doctors and the opinions are ours. It is our view and based on our experience and views on the topic. Our product for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.